Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's me, Rabbi Stephen. Hope you had a very good week. And we're excited. This weekend, Ariam crowd is becoming a bar mitzvah. He's going to be a man in the eyes of Jewish law. We're very excited. We studied very, very hard, and we're certainly looking forward to having him complete his studying, his year of studying, and show us. And now the real fun begins. Now the real studying begins. Awesome. Okay. So this week portion is Shoftim. Shoftim means judgment. And just, full disclosure, I've got a Chumash next to me to refer to, and I've got my glasses on just in case, because there's a lot going on in this portion. Now remember, Moses, it's Deuteronomy. It's the Greek word for second or repeat. And there's three of Moses's discourses to a new generation. This is not the generation that left Egypt as slaves. This is the generation of Israelites. They're like Sabras, most of them, born in the desert, that are going to enter the promised land. So they didn't hear a lot of the things that went on earlier that were talked about early in Exodus and Leviticus, a lot of the laws and things and a lot of the procedures. So now Moshe is kind of sharing that with them now, kind of preparing them to go in. So the first thing that we talk about in this portion is waging a war, waging, as they call it, an optional war. And there's going to be a lot of reasons for this. But they are focusing specifically on one particular area as we start this off, and you'll see how the flow goes. So the first thing is, when people are at war, and this is something that's going to sound very primitive to us in modern day, or maybe not so, who knows. When soldiers are away at war, their passions get going, the blood gets flowing. People do and see things that they didn't ordinarily think they can do. So this particular Torah portion starts to address part of that, which is the Israelites are conquering a city, and as they're dealing with the inhabitants of the city, one of the soldiers happens to see a woman that he desires. Okay, so typically, what happens? The women get raped, they get assaulted sexually. And the Torah is saying, basically, we know this happens, and if it does, then there are some rules, more laws of decency that you need to follow. You take the woman home, you give her a month. She shaves off her hair, shaves off her nails, makes herself look unattractive. This way, we're eliminating the passion, the lust that goes, with the wartime feelings, the emotions, the passions that come out. And let her mourn her family for a month. And then if you still want her, then you marry her and she becomes your wife with all the privileges of an Israelite wife. If you don't, then you send her home to her mother and father. Right? And that's it. The next part of this portion talks about the rebellious son. That's the roar, okay? Now, the rebellious son, and this again seems very, very primitive to us, but it's a case of if a son disobeys, he is brought before the gates and the elders. And the gate of a city, by the way, was not just a gate. Right? This is why in the V'ahavta it says you will put a mezuzah on your gate. But there was a lot of activity going on. That's where the courthouse is. That's where some trade happens. That's where city officials were. So he would be there in front of the judges, and if it was determined that the kid was incorrigible, he was put to death. Now, having said that, there are some preconditions. First of all, you all need to know it never happened. Okay, it was just a warning. It was an admonition. Okay. Second of all, it talks about a kid that engages in drunken and lustful behavior and steals. Right. Now, why does this follow the captive woman? Because there's a warning that if you do take a captive woman, remember, you're taking an alien, somebody who is not an Israelite, somebody who didn't grow up with Torah, so a lot of their pagan ways may be inculcated in the son. That's the danger of taking a non-Israelite wife, and you need to be aware of that. And again, right, you all need to know, never happened. The Mishnah says this didn't happen. The next thing is the rights of the firstborn. Okay, where are we talking about the rights of the firstborn? Well, again, we have an incorrigible son. What if he's the firstborn? Okay, but it also talks about the fact that that the son typically, all right, you have 3 sons. The portions are divided 4 ways. So the firstborn gets 2 portions. The other 2 sons get a portion each. That's the way the law went, right? So a lot of times back then, a man would have multiple wives. And one of the wives was very, very pleasing, very nice. She was kind of like his go-to sexual girl. Whereas the other wife was more relegated to, the cooking, the cleaning, the sewing, the mending, taking care of the household, a life of drudgery. So you had one wife who was like a servant, and you had another wife who was the plate. How can I say this and be respectful at the same time? But this was the wife that the man slept with, that had sex. Right? So naturally, you would come to think that one of the wives was favored over the other. The wife of drudgery was, kind of, okay, she's the drudgery wife, but the wife that, we have the relations with, she's the go-to woman. So if a son is born of the woman that was the caretaking wife, okay, he is still a firstborn and is still entitled to a lot of the firstborn privileges. Okay, so the Torah goes on after that to talk about mixing. And it kind of occurs to me, if I was a Jewish kid and I was forming a rock band, I think Forbidden Mixtures might be a pretty cool name for a band. I don't know. But it talks about forbidden mixtures. The first forbidden mixture is if you're plowing the land, you have an ox and a donkey that are yoked, that are pulling. Now, obviously, the ox or the bull is going to have a lot of strength, and they're the ones that are really going to be able to pull the wagon and do the plowing, while the donkey is either going to have to struggle to keep up, or it's the bull that's going to bear the brunt of all the work. So what they're saying is you don't mix those. Those 2 animals, you use 2 bulls, 2 donkeys. The other reason is that if the bull happens to be a male and the donkey happens to be female, what happens? They do what animals typically do. They mate and they have an offspring, and that's not allowed. The second thing that they don't do is you don't mix 2 types of fruit in one area. You have sections, okay? The third thing, and this is called, the Hebrew word is shatnez, is where you have a mixture of fabrics. So like, for example, wool and cotton linen. You don't mix those. Right? So the question is, why? Why don't we, who cares if you have wool and linen together? All right, so you don't have an ox and a donkey. What if it's a real strong donkey and a kind of a weak ox? Or if you have 2 donkeys to compensate for the ox? Why don't we do that? Part of the reason, and some people say this is a hukat, this is a decree. No rhyme, no reason. This is what Hashem says. We just do it. Other people say, well, because Hashem, in his infinite wisdom and intelligence, had a very specific reason for creating all this diversity on this planet. And in honor of Hashem, we keep that separate. We keep species separate, be they animal, fruit, linen. Now, with the wool and the cotton, there's kind of an extra commentary on that too. Wool is from sheep. It's from an animal, so it's an animal byproduct. Cotton linen is from cotton. It's a fruit. It's like a kind of a vegetable, if you will. So you've got an animal fabric and you have a vegetable fabric in a sense, and you don't mix them. It's kind of like the laws of kashrut. Why do we have kashrut? Because we do. And a lot of people have speculated as to why we have laws of kashrut. Some people said, well, they had wooden bowls back then. Some of the meat may have gotten into the crevices of the bowl, and that kind of messes up the milk. It ruins it, so you don't want to do that. Whereas other people say, well, it's one of these things where you just don't do milk and meat because they're both heavy and there's a health reason, etc., etc. Okay, the bottom line is because Hashem says it, we do it. It's that simple. And some people may have an issue with that. They say, well, am I supposed to blindly obey? Well, yeah, kind of, but folks, it's not like we're saying God says go attack these people and kill them, so go do it. They're not saying Hashem says, when you reach the age of 30, jump off a bridge and kill yourself, okay? We're talking about what you can eat. That's it, right? So you can't have lobster or shrimp. Who cares, right? There's a million other things you can have, right? So you can't mix wool and linen. Then don't. Now, just kind of as an aside before we close this, I'll mention this. There's a big commentary going on saying, okay, let's say you have a talit that is a linen talit, and yet you're going to put the tzitzit, which is wool, a thread of wool. Can you do it? And the answer is yes, you can. That is an exception because technically it's not a mixture. You're just putting it on. You're not mixing the fibers together to create a garment. All you're doing is you're putting the wool tzitzit on the linen. So that's okay. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I appreciate your consideration and your attendance. So I hope you had a great week. Have a great weekend. Again, we're looking forward to Ari being bar mitzvahed, and in 2 weeks we got Nathan Gold, and we'll talk about him too. Shabbat shalom, everybody, and thank you again.